Already spent like 20 minutes.
Huh.
Or yeah, a lot of problems. So first, my internet wasn't working. I have AT&T, which are horrible for some reason here. I've never had a problem with Verizon, who was my previous internet provider. And then I had mic problems. But other than that, we're good to go. So, did you guys are you guys good to go just to skim through, get like a brief overview of chapter two?
Yes.
Cool, because I didn't do any slides. I didn't think it was necessary because I kind of last week I kind of talked about a portion of what chapter two is all about,
Hmm.
and I kind of failed at trying to explain the gears and how it was explained in the book, not realizing that chapter two was basically what I was trying to explain. And I figured we'd just skim through some of the main topics of this, and then we can kind of start talking about that project that we were talking about. I think towards the end, because I think schedule-wise, I'll probably have more time to actually put to that. Because next week I move to California,
Hmm.
and it will be a lot harder for me to do stuff while I'm trying on an airplane and without internet. So yeah, but let me just jump in. So we're doing the practical object-oriented programming or object-oriented design in Ruby, and chapter two is all about designing classes with a single responsibility. So with that being said, I think Sandy Metz does a really good job in explaining exactly what that means, what classes being doing only one thing, and that's what basically this first I guess section of the chapter is all about. It's about for one, if you can explain like your classes, so her example that she goes through in the book right off the bat is about bicycles, and the methods within the bicycle they all do one thing. So, but if you can explain what your class does in one sentence or less, then you're pretty much on the right track. But if you have to explain that if your bicycle could be a mountain bike or a fixie bike or a road bike or whatnot, then you might have to start abstracting things in a class. So that's kind of I guess the overlying test that you could try to make sure that your classes do one thing. Um, I don't have any examples off the top of my head, but there are some in the book or in this section. What gets split out for one being gears, being able to build the gears of the bike, and only not have to worry about certain things like diameter with the cranks and stuff like that. I think she had that towards the end. Yep, here we go. And where is that code example? I think it's further in. There was a section where she was talking about gear inches. I don't know if you guys remember that was. Yeah, here we go. Um, so obviously the gear does one thing. It knows about gears and knows how to build gears. And one of the issues that she had with this method, gear inches, is that you had to assume that gear that no matter what, whenever you build a gear, it's going to be in inches. So if in the future, and part of this is also about future proofing your code. So in the future, if someone decided that down the road that maybe when it started using centimeters or feet or whatever to actually create these gears, then that gear inches method would be a problem down the road. So trying not to couple yourself too tightly with specific business logic information in the code and trying to abstract that. So rather than doing gear inches, I think not sure what she puts, but instead of doing gear inches, you can just do what could you do? Gear calculation and handle all the calculation within the gear, and not have so you wouldn't have to make the bike think about how many inches or if the gear was going to be in inches as far as the size. It just makes it easier down the road to be able to have code that's easily movable. So, for example, if you wanted to take this ratio out of the gear and maybe if, since this is actually just thinking about what a chain and a cog to at the ratio between a chain and a cog, um, that could be easily abstracted to somewhere else. If it was going to be a module building the bike, you could actually just take that method out. Not sure if I'm explaining that very well, but did you guys have like anything that kind of stuck out on you? Maybe that you saw that. I know, Jeff, you read this before, and
Yeah, the things that I marked in this chapter that were useful to me were kind of like what you were saying, that question of, Mr. Class, what is your method? And she says here, on page 22, if you rephrase every one of its methods as a question, asking the question how to make sense. For example, please, Mr. Gear, what is your ratio? Seems perfectly reasonable, while please, Mr. Gear, what is your gear inches is on shaky ground. And please, Mr. Gear, what is your tire size is just downright ridiculous.
yeah,
So, just kind of a quick litmus test. I think that's a nice thing to apply, just to make sure that you do have that single responsibility principle being applied.
yeah. And there's just below that paragraph I highlighted in my PDF. I don't usually use that feature very often, but I thought this was good. That section where it talks about another way to hone in on a class is to attempt to describe it in one sentence, which I mentioned earlier. But remember that a class should do the smallest useful thing possible. So that's something good to think about. I know I work in Rails on a regular basis, and when I make classes, I don't always keep that in mind. Just because a lot of the business logic, like there's so much in the code that I work in my personal projects and also at work, that I can actually refactor down into something that has less coupling between the objects, that can be more cleaner. And a lot of times I don't think of that. And I think just those questions that you were reading earlier, I think would be a really good practice for me to do as I start new classes or new features within the applications, and also when I go to revisit other features too, to kind of look at it and think maybe certain pieces of code don't belong in this class, and maybe it's time to start making new classes or new modules to be able to abstract this code and to make it cleaner.
Here's a question for you, Brian. As you've gone through this and you've been doing it for a while, have you started automatically becoming using simplicity more in your programming?
I think I do. I definitely will use smaller methods. Now, I can't say I do it all the time. I know today I'm working on some code that's not even testable because it's actually a rake task. So my rake tasks are very large, and I've tried really hard to make them smaller and make it more sense, and try to abstract some code out elsewhere. But I think I do write simpler. But I do also do. There's another practice in the book about just getting things done at first. I heard it. I'm not sure where I got it from, but I always say it all the time at work. I say you got to write bad code first to write good code. And sometimes you can get really hung up, and she explains this later in the book, but sometimes you get really hung up on trying to make the code the cleanest as possible on first go through, where you don't write any code at all. Like you could spend hours just trying to think of the best way to write a line of code, and sometimes it gets a lot easier for me to write bad code out that's not very thought-provoking, or it is thought-provoking, but it's not very clean. And it goes against the practice of the book, but it makes it easier for me to look at and then refactor before I show anybody else. I don't know if that answers your question, but
it did, because you brought up what I was thinking, that at some point it's better just to get it down, see what happens, and then you can always go back and clean up your mess, basically.
Afterwards. Yeah, exactly. And it's important to go back and clean up your mess, because a lot of times. Sometimes I'm guilty of it. I'll write a mess and never revisit it. So what I've gotten the habit of is writing to-do notes in my code. She mentions in this section of the book that you should be able to write code without comments, and so that way you shouldn't have to explain yourself in comments what's happening. So rather than comments, I always do to-dos, to-dos to refactor. So that way, if I forget and I'm working on a feature so large that maybe a month later I'm done with it, but when I first started, I wrote some to-dos. That way, if it goes in the PR, if I miss it, then at least my coworkers will be able to see a to-do and say, hey, by the way, you wrote a note for yourself to change this, so you probably should change this. So if I know I'm going to write a big mess or some spaghetti, I usually will write a to-do, so that way I won't forget to go back and revisit it or refactor it. But yeah, it's and then as she goes into, like, especially when you have deadlines, like I do, it's a lot easier to, because at work what we'll do is if we do have to do some bad code at first just to get something out, we'll write a to-do, and then we'll write a tech deck ticket to remind ourselves to go back and refactor it later, or in the next sprint is what we usually do. Yeah, but no fear in writing bad code at first. I've gotten over the whole fear of I mean, I'm newer into Rails and Ruby, so I usually come in with that newer mindless thinking usually, and I usually have lots of questions about other people. So I think everybody's kind of used to the way I operate at work, and they know that if they can get input in a PR for me, or if they can input while I'm actually still working on the feature, they usually do. So yeah, you definitely we just kind of have to put yourself out there, even if it's going to be a to-do note. But don't write comments. I listen Ruby.
That's good to know. I figure because in the beginning I'm like, oh, this is like as I'm learning. And it's I'm trying to learn in the beginning, but sometimes you get tied up into it.
Yeah, and what's even worse is like when you do TDD, so you're writing tests, and sometimes your tests will be horrible. All right, so I could start. I think my TDD has gotten a lot better as of late, but when I used to start TDD, it was not very good testing. I would write very brittle tests for very specific things, and it's the same way you do tests that only do one thing, or you do classes that do one thing, and you use classes that are single responsibility. You have to use that same sort of logic when you write tests, so that way your tests aren't easily breakable. Like you want your test to break, but you don't want your test to break over silly things. Like, for example, if you're testing ratios, you don't want it to break because you decided to change your dollars to cents or your cents to dollars, which I actually had a test break last week because of that change. So little things like that. But yeah, that's chapter 9. So I won't talk too much more about testing. But yeah, I mean this chapter is pretty straightforward. It's good to always think about writing things that are definitely simpler at first, even if you have to refactor it down to actually see what you're doing overall. It definitely makes it a lot easier. And then also the rules that we talked about with the Sandy Metz rules about having the class below 100 lines and methods being less than 5 lines and all those other rules. Those are also easier to see too when you write a bunch of code and you go back and look at the code you had just written, and you just got to ask yourself, does this fall within those principles or those guidelines of what practical design looks like.
Quick question. Do you put your to-dos in the comments then? Instead of putting a comment, you put a comment to do?
Yeah, I just do comment and then capital TODO, and then I'll just write out what I plan on fixing later. And then once I get so I'll throw in usually I'll do a commit, which I'll do work in progress commit, so I'll do capital WIP, so that way it's clear in the commit that this is a work in progress. And if I do have to commit something, like if I did normally I try not to commit to-dos, but if it's still a work in progress and there's many steps that needs to happen for this to work, then I'll go ahead and do that. But I just make it very apparent that this is a to-do, and this is something that's going to be changing it, and that should not make it into the PR. Usually that's what I'll go for. But yeah. And this is not a practice that I actually came up with. This is something that someone else at work started doing, and we've everybody in the team is kind of like follow the same practice. So we all do this on the same team. So, and I'm a team of, I think we're up to like 14 developers, and so we all do this same thing, which makes it a lot easier. I think somewhere else, but when I get there, they might have a different setup of what they do, and I'll just mold into what they do eventually. But if I like this this method of doing to-dos and for refactoring, and for all projects that I do now, I do the same thing. So I'll carry that on unless I figure out something else that's better. Cool. But yeah, these chapters are these first few chapters are pretty short. There's some of the things she mentions in the back is expose previously hidden qualities for refactoring. All methods sing responsibility. Avoid the need for comments. This is like on page 31 as she's wrapping up. Encourage reuse. So having small methods that you're able to reuse other places is always a good idea. But not using small methods that have business logic. So she had the issue of knowing specifically if you had an array of things. So if you had an array of, let's say, dollars and then people, if you wanted to calculate ticket prices or whatnot or discounts, she doesn't like the idea of having an array, having arguments for a method that come in a specific order. So that way, if you were to use a discounts method elsewhere within your application, you should different classes shouldn't have to know what position to put either people or dollar amounts. It should be interchangeable. So that was one thing that she brings up too, and she repeats that again later in other chapters. Yep, and then methods that are easy to move from class to class in case there's refactoring that's needed. But yeah, that's it. So yeah, that's it. Unless you guys had more, if you had questions more about chapter 2, I'd probably just move into that project and maybe get some. We could probably get some code written live.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I don't know if you guys subscribe to Upcase. It's Thoughtbot's kind of weekly podcast.
Yeah,
they call it the weekly iteration. And interestingly enough, this week it was they've got a book out. It's called Ruby Science, and so they're all kind of, it's just basically a catalog of refactoring goodies in there. But anyways, they talked about the parameter object this week, and okay. I had never heard of this, and it's slightly different than the approach Sandy takes, because she'll basically say that, if I remember going ahead, the way that she handles this is that she addresses it in a hash, right? But the way Thoughtbot talked about it in this parameter object is that you actually just you take all these things and you basically create a separate class, and then let's say you've got an object with 15 different attributes, right? I mean, if you think about that, I mean, you would probably never have this. Of course, this violates Sandy's rule too, but just for just to save, for a matter of argument, let's say you have this method with 15 arguments. And so what you do is you take these 15 arguments and you basically see, what's the commonality amongst all of them, and you create a class out of that. And to get the attribute for all those things, you would basically just create an instance of that class, and then you go whatever that class is named dot whatever the attribute is. And so the cool thing is you're literally just passing that object in, and even though it has 6 or 7 different attributes, you're just passing in one object. And then anyway, I just thought it was really neat. I don't think Sandy talks about that in her book at all, but I thought it was a really clever way of addressing these methods with a lot of different parameters.
Yeah, and we do a bit of that at work too.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of how strong parameters kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of pass the strong parameters into an object and the private in the controller, and then you start using that hash of attributes. And I know Ben Ornstein did a talk in Aloha Ruby back in like a few years ago, like 2013, I think, and he goes into detail of that. But it's something about refactoring. I can't remember what the talk was actually titled, but I've watched it like 10 times, I think.
Okay.
And he uses that, separating that stuff into a class. So that's also a possibility too. It cleans it up too.
Yeah.
It does break the rule, but sometimes rules are meant to be broken too. So, but I like that. I like that approach a lot.
Oh, really? So you're saying the parameter object breaks the Sandy Metz rule?
It breaks it only because you can pass in like 5 or 6 arguments.
Okay.
But these arguments, so if you had a user class and you were doing like all the user attributes, which would be name, first name, last name, email,
Yeah.
address, phone number, well, obviously going to break that rule because you're going to have an entire user object is going to have multiple attributes. So, but sometimes it might be easier to just do that class object with all the parameters in there.
Mm-hmm.
And then it might make sense then, as you do that, it might make sense maybe to take things out and put everything like an address would have like just the street name, city, zip would be its own object.
Right.
I'm just thinking refactoring out loud. If I were to get
sure.
stuck into having tons of parameters into one,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I could break that off into address as a class, and then have name and contact information in another class with phone number and everything separate.
Yeah.
So if I was forced in a PR to rethink it, then that would be my next step to separate it, which might be overkill too. Because sometimes, if you're just making user information, sometimes it doesn't make sense to separate all that stuff out.
Right.
But yeah, it's based on if it makes sense for the code, and also if it makes sense for your deadline.
Mm-hmm.
If you are trying to paint a bike shed,
Right.
and while you have a deadline and code needs to get out by this weekend, well, maybe it's time to stop painting the bike shed and this ship code.
Yeah.
So that's another.
Exactly.
It's a constant battle, for sure, which is a lot of fun. I don't know. Jeff, do you do contract work? You don't work.
Yeah. I do freelance. I used to work at a Drupal shop.
Okay.
So I basically, my background in programming is through PHP. So you guys were talking a little bit before about stuff, and coming into the object-oriented world, sometimes when I'm working on a problem, I jump into the procedural mode first, and it's sometimes I just do that, because if I can solve the problem using procedural code, cool, it's there, and then I'll sort of try to refactor it into objects later. But I find myself slowly making that transition to thinking in objects first, but it seems like if I ever approach a complex problem, I always seem to drop back to my procedural roots.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I'm just doing freelance Ruby on Rails stuff now.
Okay. Cool. So you're very familiar with deadlines, then, or do you have deadlines with your clients?
Of course.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So, I'd like to transition to the project, because I actually, after talking about it last week, we didn't record it and actually talk about it online, but I did mention it in the Slack chat.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to try to do a project while we go through these chapters of the book, and I think, especially since we just did this chapter, it'd be awesome to get some objects created. So just for the sake of the recording, we're going to try to do a Netflix API project where we can store Netflix. It was actually IMDb, wasn't it? An IMDb.
Yeah, it was
API.
IMDb.
Yeah, so store some IMDb data, and then eventually build features around that IMDb data. So basically, I think we'll just. So far, I think the brainstorming was having like movies as one object and having actors as another object. And I think if we not sure if we need other objects as far as if we're going to do directors or other roles. I think it might. I don't know if we just do. Maybe it'd be a people object. I don't know. But it'd be something to think about. I don't know, what are you guys' thoughts now that you know that
movie object since it's IMDb?
Well, in honor of Sandy in her book here, I'm not sure if we've gotten to the part where she talks about sequence diagrams. Is that next? I think that
No.
might be. So I'm always tempted to jump into sort of modeling the world with objects and stuff with what I know, but I have been trying to force myself into doing those sequence diagrams. Are you hearing me on that? And maybe we don't want to jump ahead yet, so maybe we don't want to cover that. But just what I like about that approach is she puts the emphasis on the messages as opposed to the objects.
Yeah.
But anyway, like you said, maybe since we haven't hit that yet, let's not cover that.
Yeah, because we could definitely it'll give us opportunity to refactor later.
Okay.
If we don't start with the correct way first.
Fair enough.
So again, like with just throwing code out there and then being able to look at it, or kind of just throwing it at the wall and then seeing what sort of shape it makes.
Yep. Okay, got it.
So, and I think it'll be a better process if we just start making models and then trying to see like on camera, talk about each week, talk about like what we did wrong and certain things that could be better. I think we might get a lot more out of it. Yeah.
Sounds good.
So I made the repo on the actual Ruby for Newbies GitHub page.
Mm-hmm.
For the sake of getting things started, I know, Jeff, you said you wanted to...
Yeah, I submitted a pull request.
Did you?
Yeah.
Man, I didn't even get an email alert for that. Actually, I'm going to switch and show it on my camera so that way... Where are we? Oh, there we are. Oh, well. Yeah, when did you submit this? I guess I never got
think last Wednesday or something.
Wow, you really got right on top of that, and I never saw this pull request ever. So yeah, you basically... Well, you got all the Rails stuff in there.
I mean, yeah.
Basically, just all the initial stuff.
That's all it is. Yep. Plain vanilla Rails 4, and I think I stuck in a Ruby version file there just to have it. And then I also set it up with, and this is, of course, I figured we'd just talk about this if you guys wanted to go down a different road, but I used Postgres as the database, and then I also went with RSpec. So if you want to use Minitest or another database, that's cool too. But
no, RSpec works.
Okay.
So I think now, if I just open an issue, needs movies object. So we definitely need a movies object. We need. I guess do we want to just do people, or do we want to split it out at first and separate all that?
See, here's the thing. I would call them actors.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think that's what you originally said too, Ryan.
Yeah.
And maybe the rest would be, if you want to include them, staff. Because on IMDb, they list everybody. Director, gopher, key grip, all that garbage. It's up to you. That's kind of a lot.
Yeah, we'll just go with actors for now. And we definitely will need a join table to join actors and movies.
So this is definitely going to be just kind of a many-to-many relationship, right? So like has many through.
Yeah.
Association. Yeah.
Well, you would think the movie actors belong to a movie, and a movie has many actors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the way I thought about this when I started it, because literally once I finished typing this is as far as I got when I did it the first time. I name them credits, so that way a movie has many credits, and uh, an actor can belong to a movie through credits, if that makes sense.
Okay, that'll be the join model that we're using.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yep. And somehow populate the database. With or some other means. So I did find that there was like an OMDB that you're able to search. IMDb, something like that. Yeah. So someone's already kind of did this, and they're able to make. We might not need to do Nokogiri and just steal all their data. But I don't know. It just probably just takes some hacking and trying to find whatever solution is the best. But yeah, I'm not sure if that's all that's needed. If we have movies, we've got credits, and we've got actors, and we can just populate that database, and then be able to. That might be the first step, because then down the road we want to be able to do stuff with the database to be able to search actors, and then we might have to. I think the first half of this that I've already outlined will probably go by pretty quickly. So then we'll have to like start creating more, I guess, things for us to think of to do. So for one, my idea was doing the Kevin Bacon, doing the 6 degrees of separation would be one feature.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm kind of at a blank of what else we can do to make this an interesting application. But I'm sure as we get through it, we might come up with stuff eventually.
You know how you put bacon rating instead of they rate the movies out stars. We rate them out bacons. 1, 2, 3, 4, full slap. I don't know.
Yeah, we could do that. We can add some like ancillary things, some cool bacon gifts. And some we could probably just. I mean, it doesn't have to look pretty, so we can just throw in some random bacon pieces in there. But yeah, I think it will be a fun project to have this complete after the next 9 weeks.
Yep.
So cool. So yeah, if anybody wants to grab an issue that I created or create a new issue as you think of something, we can. I think because there's a lot of people that are going to participate that can't make it to these meetings at night.
Yeah, sure.
So I guess to kind of organize this better, if you have an idea, to store it as an issue, and then people can comment whether or not it's a good idea, and maybe even post it in Slack so we see it. I have to figure out why I didn't get an email notification for that pull request, because I spent all week thinking about it but never actually looking at it, so that was weird. But yeah, and then I think you can mark the issues as your own, so that will you just know if you assign it. Actually, you can't. I think you'd have to be part of the group, so I'd have to get people's GitHub names to actually add you to the repo, so that way you can assign yourself to the issue, or if not, just leave a comment and say you're working on this, and that way nobody else will. We won't have like 3 pull requests of someone adding movies to the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then, another thing I didn't put down, I'll probably add an issue too, that we want to be able to render all this in JSON, so that way the API looks like an API. And yeah, other than that, I think it's pretty straightforward. I'll be honest, I'll probably, I'm moving this weekend. I'll probably maybe Thursday or Friday night, if no one's grabbed anything, I'll probably just start hacking away at things. But I'll give a chance for anybody who wants to grab something to grab something.
So here's me being new, because I've worked with Git a little bit.
Yeah.
Do I branch this? Do I fork this? How do I do this part? I don't know. how am I supposed to approach something like this? Because
Oh,
I've been just working on my
that's
own stuff on Git.
yeah, that's perfect. Well, this is like even the better reason for us to do this because then you'll start getting those skills up.
Hmm.
Um, Probably the best way if everybody forks this and then does a pull request like Jeff did, would probably be the easiest. So just going to let me share my screen again. Oop. So if you're in you find the repo,
Right.
obviously you just hit the fork, choose your name, and then you've got a fork that you can pull down locally. So if you I don't know, do you use the command line Git or do you use a GUI interface?
I'm using command line, so I just hit fork and it just did it.
Yeah, so then you should be able to grab your I prefer SSH because it's quite easy if you have that set up. But you
Yeah.
can just do git clone and then your SSH URL, and
Hmm.
then you'll have a local version. So that way you're upstream. So whenever you hit git push, it will push to your fork.
Right.
And that way, once you're done with what you think you're going to be done, then you just go ahead and do a pull request, which is here. And usually after you push new changes, you'll have a big green box saying, if you want to do a pull request or if you want to view your changes.
Hmm.
Um, but since I don't have any changes, it's not going to do a pull request. But basically, you just pick as usually the actual the master or sorry the base fork will be the Rubies for Newbies baking rating, and then your head fork will be your branch, and it'll show you all the changes you made, and you just literally there'll be a button here to create pull request, and you'll be good to go. And then either me or I think I made Jeff an admin also, so Jeff's able to make changes to the baking rating. If anybody else wants to do it, just message me and let me know if you want to be an admin or add it to the repo. But yeah, you'll be able to do a pull request, and I will definitely be available. I'm available for most parts of the day at work. I mean, I could swing over and do a screen hero if you need help on anything, Farish. And but yeah, I'm definitely available if you need help in forking or merging a pull request or whatnot.
Well, right now I figured in the beginning you do the model, let's say movies. So what's movies would have a title, maybe a release date, and base it off what we can pull off OMDB.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. We'll just, I mean, we don't have to go crazy. Yeah, title, release dates, or they'll have lots of credits, which will be the actors, so that way we can connect them. But yeah, just simple information.
Okay.
We don't even have to do images at first. We can get images later, or we can do images now, whichever is easier. But probably just keep it to like less than 5 parameters within those objects, so that way we don't go because you could pull tons of information from IMDb, but we kind of want to make sure we're getting code out there and we're not recreating IMDb, but rather just doing something really cool with it. But I'll probably go and leave more comments on the issues, so that way it's more clear of what we need. I didn't want to do it all, like sit there and type tons of stuff while you guys were just watching me type. But I get into work pretty early in the morning, and also I'll probably just write more notes on each issue, so that way we know exactly what
Now here's my
we're
question.
shooting
This
for.
goes back to Git. Will those notes show up on my fork, or do I have to re-fork it, or do I just
Um,
look at your master branch?
well, let me see if I can look at my fork. And that's a good question because I don't think I ever.
Well, you know what really messed me up? Just it was 3 or 4 days ago. I'm doing this Rails book, and every Git commit was a dot, not a dash A. So when I had a disaster strike and I pulled it out, all the files that the book told me to delete were in there, and my project wasn't working. I had to figure all that out. And then I looked at, that Learn Rails book, and it says, oh, this is what Git-A means, and this is why you don't do the others. I'm like, ah.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to do the period and I do dash dash all.
Mhm.
So I'm in the. I probably shouldn't be doing this, but I do usually spell out everything I do in command line. I don't use shortcuts or bash. What do you call them? Like instead of doing git add period,
Aliases.
some yeah aliases is what I'm trying to do. I don't use aliases. I actually type it very verbosely, just because I don't know. I probably shouldn't because I'm a Vim guy, so I guess I could save keystrokes, but I don't. So maybe that's something for me to look into. But other than that, I think I can end the video now because I think we have a lot of information on this for now.